Hey, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about a book called Mandate for Leadership from 1981.
Wow.
And it was a big influence on the Reagan administration.
Yeah.
And some people are saying that it's making a comeback or could make a comeback in future presidencies.
And it's a really fascinating book because it really is a roadmap for how to implement conservative policy in the government.
Yeah. So we're going to be looking at some of the things that the book suggests for reforming the bureaucracy.
Yes.
National security strategies.
Immigration,
and the role of specific agencies like the Department of Energy, the EPA, a whole bunch of others.
And one of the things that's really important for us as we go through this is to really break it down.
Yes.
This is a very complex topic. We want to make sure that everyone understands what we're talking about, so we're going to be using analogies, simple language.
Please.
Try to make it as clear as possible.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about you is your ability to take these really complicated government processes.
Oh, well, thank you.
And to really kind of lay them out in a way that makes sense.
Well, I appreciate that. That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
To make this accessible to everybody.
Exactly. So let's jump right in. One of the first things that Mandate for Leadership talks about is the administrative state.
Right.
And they believe that the administrative state has gotten too big and too powerful.
Yes. And this is a concept that you hear a lot about in conservative circles, but it can be a little bit confusing to understand what exactly it means.
Right.
So, simply put, the administrative state refers to all those government agencies and bureaucrats who are responsible for implementing and enforcing the laws that Congress passes.
Okay.
So think of it this way. Congress makes the laws, right? Like they're the chefs. They come up with the recipes, but the administrative state, they're the cooks. They take those recipes and they actually make the food and serve it up to the public.
I like that.
And Mandate for Leadership argues that, the cooks have gotten a little too much power. They're changing the recipes, they're adding their own ingredients, and they're not really listening to what the chefs want.
So they want to shift that power back to the chefs.
Yeah.
Basically, back to the elected officials in Congress.
Exactly. That's exactly right. They want to reassert the authority of Congress and, the people that we elect to represent us over the unelected bureaucrats.
All right. Well, let's get into some of the specifics here because Mandate for Leadership doesn't just talk about this broad concept. They actually get into some very detailed recommendations.
Very detailed, very specific.
Yeah. So, for example, they talk a lot about personnel management. And there's this one quote that really jumped out at me. And it says, whoever holds a government position sets its policy.
That is a very powerful statement. And it really gets to the heart of what they're trying to do here. They believe that by changing the people who work in the government, you can fundamentally change how the government operates.
Yeah. And so they propose some pretty sweeping changes in terms of how people are hired, how they're paid, how their performance is evaluated, all sorts of things like that.
And this is where it gets really interesting because, on the one hand, you could argue that, bringing in fresh blood, new ideas, shaking things up a little bit could be a good thing.
Right.
For government.
It could lead to more efficiency, more innovation.
Right.
But on the other hand, you also have to worry about, what happens when you get rid of all that institutional knowledge and experience.
Right. You lose a lot of expertise.
Exactly. So there's definitely a potential for both positive and negative consequences.
Yeah. And this is something that we're going to be looking at throughout our deep dive is what are the potential benefits
of some of these changes that Mandate for Leadership is proposing, but also what are the potential risks and drawbacks?
Absolutely, because there are always two sides to every coin, right?
Right.
And we need to consider both of them.
Yeah, so they call for a reformed bureaucracy.
Yes.
And what exactly do they mean by that?
Well, they essentially want to make government run more like a business.
Okay.
They want to streamline processes, cut red tape, increase accountability, focus on results.
Okay.
And again, there's some logic to that, right? We all want government to be more efficient, more effective. Yeah. But, the question is, can you really apply those same principles of the private sector to something as complex and multifaceted as government?
Right. And are there going to be unintended consequences that we haven't even thought about?
Exactly, because government is not just about, the bottom line. Yeah. It's about, serving the public good, protecting our rights. providing for the common defense.
All sorts of things.
All these things that you can't necessarily measure in terms of profits and losses.
Right. So this is going to be a really interesting area to explore, I think.
Yes, definitely.
As we kind of dig deeper into mandate for leadership.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's move on to our next topic, which is national security strategies.
Okay.
So mandate for leadership is very clear about its national security priorities. They believe that the United States needs to be prepared to fight two major wars at the same time.
Wow. That's a big shift.
Yes.
From how we've been thinking about defense in recent years.
Right. And they identify China as the primary threat.
Yes, China is definitely seen as the main adversary.
And they argue that the U.S. needs to modernize and expand its nuclear arsenal.
Yeah, this idea of a two-war force, it goes back decades, actually.
Yeah.
It was a central part of U.S. military strategy during the Cold War.
Right.
And it basically means that we need to have enough military power to fight and win two major wars simultaneously. And mandate for leadership is saying that, with the rise of China and other challenges around the world,
We need to go back to that.
we need to go back to that kind of thinking.
Okay, so they're not messing around.
No, they're not messing around. They're
Yeah.
very serious about this.
So what are some of the specific recommendations they make in terms of, military spending in different branches of the military?
So they talk a lot about the need to modernize the Navy,
Okay.
build more ships.
Uh-huh.
They want to expand and upgrade the Air Force's fleet of fighter jets and bombers.
Mm-hmm.
They want to invest heavily in the Space Force,
Oh,
which
yeah?
is, a relatively new branch of the military.
Right.
And they also emphasize the importance of cyber warfare,
Okay.
being able to fight and win wars in the digital domain.
So this is like a whole new realm of warfare that we're
Yeah.
really kind of just starting to grapple with.
It's a whole new battleground.
Yeah.
And they're saying that we need to be prepared to fight on that battleground as well.
Okay, so what are some of the potential implications of this kind of, shift in focus towards, military power and, this more aggressive?
Well, on the one hand,
Yeah.
Having a strong military is important,
Mhm.
right? It deters our adversaries, it protects our interests.
Right.
But on the other hand,
Mm-hmm.
there's always a risk that, focusing too much on military strength can lead to an arms race.
Okay.
It can make other countries feel threatened.
Yeah.
And it can actually make the world less safe.
Okay, so it's kind of a,
It's a delicate balance.
delicate balance.
You need to be strong, but you also need to be wise.
Right.
You need to be strategic, and you need to think about the long-term consequences.
All right, well, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will continue our deep dive into mandate for leadership. We'll be talking about immigration and a whole bunch more, so stay with us.
All right, so let's dig into what mandate for leadership has to say about specific government agencies.
Okay, cool. So where do they start?
Well, they talk about a lot of different agencies, but one that really stands out is the Department of Energy.
Okay, the Department of Energy. What do they want to do with that?
Oh, they really want to push for what they call American energy dominance.
American energy dominance.
Exactly. And what that means is essentially making the U.S. the world's leading producer of energy.
Okay.
And they see that as a key part of national security and economic prosperity.
So how do they propose to do that?
Well, they basically advocate for a shift back to more traditional sources of energy like oil, gas, and coal.
So going back to the old ways.
Yeah, in a sense.
Okay, so less focus on renewable energy like solar and wind.
Right.
Yeah.
They see those sources as unreliable and too expensive.
Interesting. Okay. What about environmental concerns, though?
Well, that's a big question. Mandate for leadership argues that we can develop these resources responsibly,
Okay.
and that the economic benefits outweigh the environmental risks.
So they're basically saying drill, baby, drill.
Pretty much, yeah. They believe that we have vast untapped reserves of energy here in the U.S. And that we should be using them to our advantage.
Okay. What about everyday people like us? How would these changes affect our lives?
Well, if they're right and it leads to lower energy prices, that could be good for consumers, right?
Right. Cheaper gas, cheaper electricity.
Exactly. But of course, there's the other side of the coin, the potential environmental impact,
Right.
increased pollution, climate change, all those things have to be factored in.
Yeah. That's a big trade-off.
It is a big trade-off.
Okay. So they talk about the Department of Energy. What other agencies are they kind of targeting for reform?
Well, they talk about a whole bunch, the EPA, is another one.
Okay, the EPA.
Yeah, the Environmental Protection Agency. They want to roll back a lot of the regulations that they see as burdensome to businesses.
So less government oversight.
Right. Less regulation, more freedom for industry to innovate and grow.
Okay. Any other big ones?
The Department of Education, they want to give more power to states and local communities.
Okay.
When it comes to education policy, they're big proponents of school choice.
Okay.
Charter schools, vouchers, things like that.
All right. So basically they want to shrink the federal government's role.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. They believe that a lot of these functions are better handled at the state and local level.
Interesting. Okay. So we talked about, national security. They want a stronger military. We talked about energy. They want to go back to more traditional sources. Immigration. What's their stance on immigration?
Oh, they're very much in favor of stricter immigration controls.
Okay.
They want to secure the border, reduce illegal immigration, and they also talk about something called visa reciprocity.
Visa reciprocity, what is that?
So basically it means that if another country makes it difficult for Americans to get a visa to travel there, we would make it equally difficult for citizens of that country to get a visa to come to the U.S.
Oh, so like tit for tat.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about fairness and reciprocity in international relations.
Okay. So mandate for leadership. We've talked about how they want to strengthen the military. They want to reform the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Shift power away from the administrative state, stricter immigration controls.
Right.
What does all of that tell us about their vision for America's role in the world?
Well, it definitely suggests some more assertive America first kind of approach.
America first. Okay.
Yeah, they believe that the U.S. should be a strong leader on the global stage,
Wow.
but they're also skeptical of international institutions and agreements.
So more going it alone.
Yeah, more unilateral action, less multilateralism.
Okay. What are the potential risks and benefits of that kind of approach?
Well, on the one hand, you could argue that it allows the U.S. to act more decisively.
Okay.
Without being bogged down by, international bureaucracy or the need to get consensus from other countries.
Right.
But on the other hand, it can also make the U.S. seem more isolated.
Okay.
More like a bully. Right.
And it can damage our relationships with allies.
Yeah, so it's a delicate balance.
It's a very delicate balance.
Okay. So we've talked about a lot of the specifics of what mandate for leadership proposes.
Right.
But let's step back for a minute and think about the bigger picture.
Right.
How could these changes, if they were implemented, how could they impact U.S. democracy?
That's a great question, and I think it's one of the most important questions we need to consider.
Yeah.
Because, democracy is a fragile thing.
Right.
It requires a careful balance of power and, mandate for leadership with its emphasis on, executive power.
Yeah.
And, limiting the role of the bureaucracy.
Right.
Some people worry that could tip that balance in a way that's not healthy for democracy.
So in other words, it could concentrate too much power in the hands of the executive branch.
Exactly. And, we've seen throughout history that when you have too much concentration of power, it can lead to abuses. It can lead to authoritarianism. Right. So that's something we definitely want to avoid.
Absolutely. We want to make sure that we're preserving the checks and balances that are so essential to our system of government.
Okay. Well, this has been really enlightening, but unfortunately, we are out of time for today. Welcome back. So we were talking about mandate for leadership and how its ideas could affect U.S. democracy. And we also mentioned another document called For the People Act. Can you kind of remind us what that one's all about?
Yeah, so For the People Act is kind of like the opposite of mandate for leadership in a lot of ways. It's a bill that was actually passed by the House of Representatives in 2021, but it's stalled in the Senate. And it's basically a big package of reforms aimed at making it easier to vote and reducing the influence of money in politics.
Okay, so it's kind of like a pro-democracy package.
Yeah, exactly. It's trying to strengthen democracy.
Okay, as opposed to, potentially weakening it, which is what some people are worried about with mandate for leadership. Okay, so what are some of the specific things that For the People Act proposes?
Well, one of the biggest things is it would create automatic voter registration.
Okay.
So when you turn 18 or when you move, you're automatically registered to vote unless you opt out.
Interesting. Okay, so it's trying to get more people registered.
Right. The idea is to make it as easy as possible for people to participate in the democratic process.
Okay. What else?
It would also expand early voting.
Okay.
So you could vote, weeks before Election Day, either in person or by mail.
So make it more convenient.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Exactly.
Oh.
It would also impose stricter limits on campaign contributions.
Okay, so trying to get money out of politics.
Right, because there's a feeling that, big money has too much influence in our elections, and that undermines democracy.
Okay, so For the People Act is trying to address that.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, you said this bill was passed by the House, but it's stalled in the Senate. Why did that happen?
Well, it's a very partisan issue. Democrats generally support the bill. Republicans generally oppose it.
Okay, so it kind of falls along party lines.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so mandate for leadership from 1981 for the People Act. Much more recent, but we can see they have some very different ideas about how our democracy should work.
Right, and I think that reflects a larger debate that's happening in our society today about, what is the role of government?
Yeah.
What are the best ways to protect our freedoms and ensure a fair and just society?
Yeah, these are big questions, and I think, we've only just scratched the surface here.
Exactly.
In our deep dive.
There's so much more we could talk about.
Right, but unfortunately, we are out of time for today.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. It's been really fascinating to kind of delve into these documents.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I hope that our listeners have found it informative and maybe even a little bit thought-provoking.
I hope so, too.
Yeah. So until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.